1/3 of the Bible is prophecy. And when I was ordained into the ministry, there were 4 different ministers from 4 different Church of God organizations laid hands upon me. And the 4th man, his name was Calvin Burrell, was the head of the Church of God in Denver, Colorado. As he prayed, he said, God set this man apart for the ministry of prophecy. That astounded me at the time. I didn't understand that, whether God would honor such a request, but it has certainly shown in the fruit of my life that God has honored it. It has not been an easy job because you're alone in many respects. Because when you tell the unbridled truth as to what's happening and you go behind the scene into Satan's realm and you pinpoint those who are promoting Satan's one world system, people are afraid to join hands with you because they know Satan is very powerful. They've seen other people who have spoken out against Satan's system and that those people have been destroyed. That's why Satan and his demons seem to be preoccupied and working overtime to destroy our church. It seems like we get no rest. One moment we have a breather, a moment of peace, and then all of a sudden another problem raises its head just to continually cause strife and disharmony within the church to discourage us. That tells me we're doing something right. We just are, or Satan wouldn't give 2 hoots and a whirlwind about us. He would go his way, leave us alone, and everybody would be content and happy. But as a result of what we're doing, we're sticking our finger in Satan's system and we're pinpointing it. So he hates us. In Matthew chapter 4, Satan the devil came to Jesus. Whether this was a literal bodily presentation of himself, a manifestation to Jesus in person, or whether he just by voice, I don't know, it doesn't say. But it does say that Jesus was led up into the wilderness by the Spirit of God. God actually allowed Jesus Christ to be tempted of Satan the devil. And the only part of this chapter 4 that I want to mention is the part where Jesus was taken up on a high mountain. Satan pointed out all the kingdoms of the earth. And he said, look, all you have to do is bow down and worship me. I will give you power over all these kingdoms. Satan had power to give Jesus Christ world rulership at that time. Jesus turned it down because he knew that his destiny was to save this world for God the Father, not for Satan the devil. So Jesus had the power, he had the Spirit in unlimited measures. So he had the power to resist. And immediately after this 40 days and 40 nights of fasting was over, it says he was a-hungered, which means he was on the brink of starvation. His body was actually beginning to cannibalize itself, feed upon itself, and so angels came and ministered unto him, provided food, water, whatever is necessary for his body to bring him back to his proper health. But the point is, Satan has the power. And many times we don't like to believe that Satan has power. God has given it to him. God is not trying to save the world at this particular moment in time. He will, at the right time, send Jesus Christ back to this earth. And in Romans 3, verse 18 to 21, it says he will restore all things just like it was to perfection in the Garden of Eden. God is going to do it, but it's going to be through Jesus Christ. But before that time, there is rising on the world scene world government. Let's face it. Alexander Haig, former Secretary of State of the United States of America, was seen on national television early in the morning on a talk show, and he was stating that, yes, the Iraqi crisis in the Middle East is now bringing about the solidification of the new world order. The identical words that we've been saying for years, and others have said. Then, at a later time, we saw yet other people coming on television. Henry Kissinger, and he's been an advocate for the New World Order. He's been a double agent for the United States and for the KGB of the Soviet Union since World War II. He stated publicly on television that now we're seeing emerging the New World Order. Then George Bush. You can't get higher in rank in the United States of America or technically in the world. He gave an address to the nation on all 3 television networks. And most of us flip the channel because they're always boring speeches. But if you watched it, right at the closing of his speech, he stated that we now are seeing the new world order come to being. And then on the 5:30 news of September 25th, 1990, this is NBC, we saw in the United Nations organizations there were 15 prime ministers. These are not representatives to the United Nations, ambassadors. These were just prime ministers who were there. They voted to sanction Iraqi airspace and not let anybody fly in and out of Iraq. Now, the purpose I'm mentioning this is that a Soviet delegate stood up and stated that we must depose Saddam Hussein because he is preventing the emergence of the new world order. Revelation 13 says very clearly in verse 1 and 2 that there will rise a government. And it says down in verse 7 and 8 that it will bear rule over all nations, languages, and tongues. Apparently it's going to be more than just what people have thought in the past, 10 nations on the European continent. Apparently it's going to be global in aspect because it gives the identical phraseology in Daniel 7 talking about Jesus Christ when he is coronated before God the Father and then sent back to this earth with the saints that he would rule over all nations, languages, and tongues, and it would be a global government. And we know that Jesus will rule completely all over the world. I want to mention a man's name, a philosopher by the name of Hegel. He lived from 1770 to 1831. He was a German philosopher. He was born over 200 years ago. And what does this man and his philosophy have to do with us today? I'll explain, but now let's go back just for a moment. In 1843, another man was born. He changed his name. His name was Mayer Amschel, and they changed it to Rothschild. He had hanging out in front of his banking establishment, and the word Rothschild means red shield. Here it was, a red flag that hung out on front of his banking fraternity downtown in Germany. So here was a German banker who began to loan money to nations. If one country wanted to go to war with another, he would loan them the money. Then he would also loan the other country money, so that there would always be what is called a balance of power between those two countries. One wouldn't get the upper hand on the other. And so if one nation that he loaned money to didn't repay it, he would finance another nation to go to war with that one to punish it. And today we call it the balance of power, and this is where it came from. This man Hegel created a philosophy. He believed that every existing idea and fact belongs to an all-embracing mind. It's called a universal consciousness. Has anybody ever heard of the New Age movement? They believe in a universal consciousness. Now, there's something else that he said would have to happen. Hegel took the position that every idea, and he named it thesis, had also an opposite idea, or the antithesis. You pronounce it antithesis. And when the thesis and the antithesis met in a collision, you would have, coming from the thesis and the antithesis, the synthesis. So here it is. Here's the thesis on one side. We'll catch this on camera maybe. Wake up. Okay, the thesis. This is an idea. Then you have the opposite idea, which is called the antithesis. What equals this, on the other side of the equal mark, is the synthesis. So the thesis, then the antithesis, out of that comes the synthesis. All right, so what idea in the world today has come on the scene? All right, let's hold up a few more charts. We saw founded out of the World War II, communism, didn't we? It became the seen enemy of the Western world. But what is the Western world? If you have a thesis, an idea called communism, then on the other hand you have capitalism. Here's the opposite idea. Then when these two come into collision with each other, then you produce the New World Order. This is very interesting. Why would I say this is interesting? Because there was a man who wrote a book and it was published in 1926. He was a Jesuit priest at a college in the United States of America. He stated that the new economic system that would come into vogue in the latter part of the 20th century would neither be communism nor capitalism, but it would be an economic system where that would be the Catholic Church would rule over it. I thought that was quite interesting. So we have the emergence of a new world order that's going to come out of all of this. A one world government, and it was financed to start with by international bankers, communism. To be exact, in 1917, $50 million in gold was sent through Germany in sealed boxcars with Lenin, Trotsky, and 250 assassins to assassinate the Tsar of Russia. I want to give a quote now from a Sir William Pitt. This was given in 1770. He was speaking before Britain's House of Lords. I quote him, "There is something behind the throne greater than the king himself." End of quote. As a direct result, a phrase came from that called power behind the throne, showing that the king himself or the Queen of England was not in total charge of that country. It's interesting that by this time, the Bank of England had already come under the control of the House of Rothschild. He's had 5 sons, and he sent his sons to various capitals in Europe and to London, England. And they created the central banks of those countries. In 1844, Mr. Benjamin Disraeli, who was a famed statesman in the English Parliament, wrote a book called Coningsby. In that book, here's what he said, quote, "The world is governed by very different personages from what is imagined by those who are not behind the scenes." End of quote. So here we are in the United States of America. We have a representative type government. We vote for our governors. We vote for our representatives in our state senates and legislature. We send senators and House of Representative members to Washington, D.C. They're supposed to be representing the people. Whatever our wishes are, they're supposed to be carrying those out for our benefit. Notice what Mr. Felix Frankfurter, who was a justice of the United States Supreme Court, stated. I quote, "The real rulers in Washington are invisible and exercise power from behind the scenes." End of quote. That was found in the book Franklin Delano Roosevelt, My Exploited Father-in-Law by Curtis Dahl. Frankfurter was not alone in his understanding that there was someone else who was literally ruling the government of the United States. In March 26 of 1922, a Mr. John F. Hyland, mayor of New York City, said in a speech, and I quote, "The real menace of our republic is the invisible government, which like a giant octopus sprawls its slimy length over our city, state, and nation. At the head is a small group of banking houses, generally referred to as international bankers. This little coterie of powerful international bankers virtually run our government for their own selfish ends." End of quote. That was in an article, Who Are Our Rulers, in the American Mercury magazine, September 1960, page 136. In a letter that was dated November 21st, 1933, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt wrote the following, I quote, this is found in the book FDR, His Personal Letters, page 373. Quote, "The real truth of the matter is, as you and I know, that a financial elite in the large centers has owned the government ever since the days of Andrew Jackson." End of quote. Mr. Mayor Angel Rothschild made a statement that he cares not who makes the laws in a country as long as he can issue the money to that country. That way he can control the economics and the lifestyle of every citizen in that country at his will. On February 23rd of 1954, Senator William Jenner warned in a speech, and I quote, this was found in America's Unelected Rulers, The Council on Foreign Relations by Phoebe Courtney, page 1 and 2. Quote, "Today the path toward dictatorship in the United States can be laid by strictly legal means. unseen and unheard by the Congress, the President, or the people. Outwardly, we have a constitutional government. We have operating within our government and political system another body representing another form of government. A bureaucratic elite which believes our Constitution is outmoded and is sure that it is on the winning side. All the strange developments in foreign policy agreements may be traced to this group, who are going to make us over to suit their pleasure. This political action group has its own local political support organizations, its own pressure groups, its own vested interest, its foothold within our government, and its own propaganda apparatus. End of quote. There is, in the United States today, a term that many people have heard. It's called the establishment. This expression was popularized by a British writer by the name of Henry Farley, and it had to do with the ruling clique in Britain and the ruling leaders in that country. It's now used in the United States. To be exact, it is even found in the American Heritage Dictionary. Notice what it says about this word, the establishment. Quote, an exclusive group of powerful people who rule a government or society by means of private agreements and private decisions. End of quote. So those who are really working from the inside of the government of the United States are those individuals who now control our government. And the Congress, the Senate, House of Representatives who pass the laws cannot pass anything unless it is approved by them, for them, and for their purpose of creating a world government. A columnist by the name of Edith Kermit Roosevelt, who was the granddaughter of President Theodore Roosevelt, said the following, I quote, the word establishment is a general term for the power elite in international finance, business, the professions, and government, largely from the Northeast, who wield most of the power regardless of who is in the White House. She goes on, most people are unaware of the existence of this legitimate mafia. Yet the power of the establishment makes itself felt from the professor who seeks a foundation grant to the candidate for a cabinet post or State Department job. It affects the nation's policies in almost every area. End of quote. That was taken from the book Elite Clique Holds Power in United States. It wasn't a book, I'm sorry. It was a newspaper article in the Indianapolis News, December 23rd, 1961. So in the public mind, the American establishment is probably associated with big business, with the wealthy, the old-time families that settled in the northeastern part of the United States. The sons of these families have followed a long traditional career. They go to private schools. They go to Groton. That's the #1 private school that trains these young men and women. Then they go on to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, or Columbia. These are the exclusive fraternities in these colleges that they join, such as Yale's secret society called Skull and Bones, which President George Bush was a part of, and his father, Prescott Bush, before him. Some of these bright young men also receive Rhodes Scholars and go to England, are trained in one world government. Others progress on to Wall Street. They run the large corporations and the investment houses on Wall Street. They hook up with such companies as Chase Manhattan International Bankers, Morgan, J.P. Morgan Banks, Kuhn Loeb International Bankers, the Mercantile Banks, and so on, all the big international banks in the city of New York or London, England. And then many of those are even branch banks from Germany, such as the Schroeder Bank and the Rothschilds, which started in Germany. They also hook up with think tanks in America, such as the Brookings Institute, the RAND Corporation, and they're the ones who come up with new ideas and new programs in which to move America along its destination. These organizations are funded by such organizations as the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, and then they use these grants in order to create public textbooks for our schools and so on. to brainwash our young people into accepting a new world order and the deletion of the sovereignty of the United States of America. There's an organization that was created by the international bankers, which, as I'm speaking right now, the head of this organization is David Rockefeller, who was the chairman of the board of Chase Manhattan Bank. That bank has belonged to his family for many, many years. This is called the Council on Foreign Relations. This organization was formed in order to create a system by which they can train people to go into government to take over government positions and the State Department of the United States. Therefore, they can create the foreign policy for the United States government for their own purposes. A historian, Mr. Arthur Schlesinger Jr., has called the Council on Foreign Relations, and I quote, "a front organization for the heart of the American establishment," end of quote. That was found in his book, 1,000 Days, page 128. Mr. David Halberstam wrote a book called The Best and the Brightest. And on page 6, he calls the Council on Foreign Relations the establishment's unofficial club. It's a club by which all the brightest and those who are trained are asked to join. And no one goes into this organization unless they're given personal invitation. Newsweek magazine of September 6, 1971, page 74, referred to the Council on Foreign Relations leaders as the foreign policy establishment of the United States. Mr. Richard Rivera, in writing in Esquire magazine and the article The American Establishment, May 1962, page 107, saw the Council on Foreign Relations, and I quote, as a sort of presidium for that part of the establishment that guides our destiny as a nation, end of quote. So there is an organization that is very powerful, that has very silently taken over the government of the United States. And it guides our nation into whatever it chooses, in whatever path and direction. The Council on Foreign Relations describes itself as a non-profit organization, and they say they're not partisan toward anything. They will accept views from anyone and anywhere at any time, and that they're not partisan. Remember Mr. Hegel, he said that the implementation of the thesis, and when it collides with the antithesis, then it would bring about a synthesis. Mr. Hegel said that this had to be applied to international affairs in order for there to be created a world government. Mr. Hegel also said that it would take people with a great deal of money at the right time and the right place to implement the thesis, the antithesis, and to bring about the synthesis. So enter international bankers. They are the ones who came on the scene with great deal of money. And the international bankers have no loyalty to any country whatsoever. It doesn't matter where they're located. They don't care what kind of country or what kind of government that runs it, whether it's a dictatorship, totalitarian, or whether it's a representative type government. It doesn't matter to them, because they can loan money to them, and then if they don't repay that loan, they raise up another nation. And they can finance revolution wherever they want because they have the money to do it with. So what happened was, in 1913, before World War II and the United States was engaged in it, a man from Rhode Island, a senator, decided that he would introduce legislation in the Senate that would take money out of the hands of the constitutional, legitimate coiners of that money. That's Congress. They would take it out of Congress's hand and they would create what is called the Federal Reserve System. The Federal Reserve System is neither federal, it's not a reserve, and it's not government whatsoever. Federal Reserve System has its own seal of incorporation, which no government agency is an incorporation. They do not have reserves. When you look and you get documents from the Federal Reserve System itself, it states very clearly that they are a debt money system and that no new money goes into circulation unless you or I or someone else borrows money. It's either government or one of us, and it puts us further and further in debt. And the purpose for this was, after a 50 to 70 year period, It would so get everyone in the country in debt so much that there would have to come a Great Depression. And out of the rubbles of this depression, they would furnish the solution. And the solution, the synthesis, would be world government and the mark of the beast. The Council on Foreign Relations, while it remains largely unknown to the people of the United States, only on about 3 or 4 different occasions has the name ever appeared on television. They have taken over the State Department of the United States, starting with the Franklin Delano Roosevelt administration. They actually now create foreign policy. Any country in the world that does not want to go along with the new world order which they are creating, they're overthrown. What happened to Batista, who was ahead of Cuba? Cuba was the most progressive country in Latin America. And yet when the State Department of the United States finished with it, it had a communist dictator ruling that country. And it's now one of the most impoverished countries in Latin America. What happened in Nicaragua? They had the overthrow and the help of the State Department of the United States to put pressure upon the legitimate government there. And the communists took over. And their army, the Communist Army, still runs that country, even though they had an outward show of a free election. What happened in the Philippines? What happened to Marcos? Marcos was pro-American 100%. I'm not saying that he didn't have his short-sightedness. Everybody does. Everybody has their weaknesses. He lined his pocketbook. There's no doubt about it. Let's face it. However, he was on America's side. But when members of the Chase Manhattan Bank went to Marcos of the Philippines, offered to relieve him of all the debt where he had borrowed money from the international bankers, specifically Chase Manhattan Bank, he refused, because he would have to sign a note saying that the bankers would have perpetual rights to all the natural resources in the Philippines. Less than 30 days, the State Department of the United States and the government of the United States deposed him through pressure. Every country that the State Department does not want to have that legitimate government in office, the State Department of the United States sees to it they're overthrown. What about Ian Smith in the country of Rhodesia in South Africa, one of the most mineral-rich countries there was? Our country, the United States, said we're going to have sanctions against Ian Smith in Rhodesia. They said you must have 1 vote per person, whether it's black or white, knowing that the black population was about 6-1 over the whites. He did it. He allowed it. And you know what? Another pro-Western government went into office in Rhodesia. That wasn't good enough, though. The State Department of the United States, a year later, helped to pressure that government to collapse. And who went into office? A communist. Once that communist took over office, then we lifted the sanctions and everything has been going as normal. Today it's called Zimbabwe. And so they got their man into office. Well, these are some pretty powerful statements about people in the United States. But we're going to prove a few things before I'm through here this morning. The Christian Science Monitor once observed, and I'm quoting, "There is a constant flow of the Council on Foreign Relations members from private life to public service. Almost half the council members have been invited into some official government position or to act as consultants at one time or the other." End of quote. That was in their September 1st, 1961 issue. Mr. Joseph Kraft, in writing in the Harper's Magazine, July of 1958, said the following about the Council on Foreign Relations. "It's a school for statesmen." End of quote. Now, Mr. David Halberson again, in the New York Magazine of September 20th, 1971, says, quote, "They walk in one door as businessmen and come out the other door as statesman-type figures." End of quote. History tells the truth. Do you and I realize that through 1988, 14 out of 14 secretaries of state have been Council on Foreign Relations members. 14 Treasury secretaries, 11 defense secretaries, and hundreds of other federal government workers and department heads have all been members of the Council on Foreign Relations. This tells me that that organization, whatever it stands for, whatever it pushes politically, that is what's going to be demonstrated by the laws of the government and by the foreign policy position of our government. I'd like to quote a Mr. Anthony Lucas in the New York Times Magazine, 1971. Quote, "Everyone knows how fraternity brothers can help other brothers climb the ladder of life. If you want to make foreign policy, there's no better fraternity to belong to than the Council on Foreign Relations. When Henry Stimson, the group's member, went to Washington in 1940 as Secretary of War, he took with him John McCloy, who was to become Assistant Secretary in charge of personnel." Now, what happens if you're in charge of personnel? You bring in other personnel who you choose. McCloy has recalled, and this is a quote within a quote, "Whenever we needed a man, we thumbed through the roll of the Council on Foreign Relations membership and put through a call to New York." End of quote. Over the years, and this is Mr. Lucas continuing his quote, "And over the years, the men McCloy called in turn called other council members." End of quote. So we can see that government official after government official, starting in 1940, were Council on Foreign Relations members. Now, according to the Council on Foreign Relations itself, as of June of 1987, 318 of its members are currently, as I'm speaking from that text of 1987, were government officials. Now, the second major way that the Council on Foreign Relations gets its policies and it markets, really, its recommendations to the House of Representatives and the Senate is that they make laws, they create them, they write them, and introduce them to other senators and House of Representative members who are members of the Council on Foreign Relations. And since they're fraternity brothers, they're working for the same purpose, world government, then that legislation is introduced into Congress. And it's debated and so on. In the annual report of 1986, the Council on Foreign Relations said, and I quote, "The Council on Foreign Relations does not determine foreign policy." They said they didn't determine it. And yet, when you go back and look at all the laws and the signatures of those who introduced laws that have socialized America since 1940, the signatures of those who introduced the laws, every time it has a Council on Foreign Relations member on there, their signature. So, you know, if something quacks and it waddles and it's got feathers and it's got a bill, you kind of get the hint it's a duck, right? Well, if the Council on Foreign Relations always introduces legislation that is going to create a new world order, dismantle the United States, and the signature that introduces the bill is a council member, you kind of get an idea this is what they're working for. Well, their 1987 report declared, quote, "The Council takes no institutional position on issues of foreign policy." So now they say, hey, we don't have anything to do with foreign policy. We don't care what the government does. We're just a forum. We're a think tank. And we don't have anything to do with the government. However, let's go a little further. Mr. Robert Moskin, writing in March of 1987 in the magazine Town and Country, said, and I quote, "The Council on Foreign Relations has long sought to influence United States foreign policy." End of quote. In Harper's Magazine, a Mr. Joseph Kraft noted, I quote, "The Council on Foreign Relations has been the seat of some basic government decisions. Some set the context for many years." End of quote. If you want to know what is going to happen in the world tomorrow, a few years from now, read their Foreign Affairs magazine today. They tell all their other members in articles in the Foreign Affairs magazine that's published 4 times a year. And then from there, everyone begins to work and proceed. Mr. Ward, Admiral Chester Ward, he was the former Judge Advocate General of the United States Navy. He was invited to join the Council on Foreign Relations. He did. After he joined, he said that he was absolutely shocked as to what he discovered. Notice what he said. He wrote a book in 1975, and it was co-authored by Phyllis Schlafly, right up here in Alton, Illinois. On page 151 of that book that was entitled Kissinger on the Couch, quote, "Once the ruling members of the Council on Foreign Relations have decided that the United States government should adopt a particular policy, the very substantial research facilities of the Council on Foreign Relations are put to work to develop arguments, both intellectual and emotional." See why that should be implemented. "To support the new policy and to confound, discredit, intellectually and politically, any opposition." End of quote. Now do we begin to see why the Watergate scandal happened? Richard Nixon was trying to expose after he had been used. He thought he was going to be the first world dictator in the New World Order. That's why he wanted to run in 1968 and have a two-term into the presidency, and then by 1976, 200 years after the founding of the Illuminati, their program for world government would be in place. Richard Nixon began to get cocky. He began to be his own man instead of following orders, so they had to get rid of him. So they framed him, is basically what happened. Now, the CFR also claims to be pluralistic. They have many views coming into it. But when you look at what is in the writing and those who come to their headquarters and give speeches to the membership, you'll quickly see that that's only a front. And it's so much verbiage to turn your head and to make you and I think that it is not an organization that could influence our government. Mr. Robert Moskin recounts of the CFR's early days. Notice what he said, quote, "Although the council itself never took a position, its members' bias or their prejudice was apparent to all." End of quote. Now, who were some of those members that were biased? Does anybody remember a man by the name of Alger Hiss? He was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And Mr. Richard Barnett, who was a Council on Foreign Relations member, wrote in 1972, I quote, that in recent years a few symbolic policy critics have actually been recruited, but failure to be asked to be a member of the council has been regarded for a generation as a presumption of unsuitability for high office in the national security bureaucracy. End of quote. So if you're not asked to be a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, you don't have an opportunity to become a high official in the government of the United States. The New York Times said that the establishment organ, which is Foreign Affairs, actually tells what the Council is going to do. It tells the direction which the Council on Foreign Relations is going to lead the country. Well, does the Council on Foreign Relations advocate globalism? Yes, it does. In all the foreign affairs, you will find article after article talking about globalism. And it says, if we can't directly bring about a one-world government, we will suggest stepping stones toward this end. And then after these things are suggested, that's when they're implemented in the government of the United States. Mr. Admiral Ward, I will quote on page 144 to 150 of that book. He said that the CFR has as a goal, I quote, "the submergence of United States sovereignty and national independence into an all-powerful one-world government." He said this lust to surrender the sovereignty and independence of the United States is pervasive throughout the membership. In the entire CFR lexicon, there is no term of revulsion carrying a meaning so deep as America first. End of quote. So the CFR, if you and I were to believe that America should be first and we should maintain our high standard of living, the CFR would say, no, we've got to shut those people up. We can't even let them go into office. Let's find out now from documentation of their own instrument called the Foreign Affairs where their loyalties lies. Is it with America, or do they want to create a new world order? And are they the ones who are funding it through their international bankers? The September 1922 issue of Foreign Affairs condemned what is called, and I quote, the dubious doctrines expressed in the phrase safety first and America first. End of quote. In the December 1922 magazine, it said, and I quote, "Obviously, there's going to be no peace or prosperity for mankind so long as it remains divided into 50 or 60 independent states," which is a nation. "Equally obviously, there is going to be no steady progress in civilization or self-government among the more backward peoples until some kind of international system is created that will put an end to the diplomatic struggles, to the attempt of every nation to make itself secure." The last sentence. "The real problem today is that of world government." End of quote. This is the Council on Foreign Relations, the first year they put out their publication. A 1944 Council publication that was entitled American Public Opinion, Post-War Security Commitments. Here's what it said, quote, "The sovereignty fetish," that's our wanting to remain a free country. Remember, we're fighting during World War II. "The sovereignty fetish is still so strong in the public mind that there would appear to be little chance of winning popular assent to American membership in anything approaching a super-state organization. Much will depend on the kind of approach which is used in further popular education." End of quote. So they decided from that day forward they would have to create a new type of educational system in America to educate the young people with terms such as interdependence of all nations. Then they started their exchange programs, sending our students to other countries, other country students sending their students here. In 1959, the Council on Foreign Relations issued a paper called Study Number 7, Basic Aims of United States Foreign Policy. Notice what some of those aims were. Remember, this is not even a government organization, and yet they stated this is what the aims are. Number 1, search for an international order. What did President Bush say? The New World Order. What did the United Nations representatives say that stood on national television September 25th, 5:30, NBC Nightly News, and said we must get rid of Saddam Hussein and we condemn him because he's holding back the emergence of the New World Order. And this was written all the way back in 1959. Then I'll continue. Now, point number 2 in this paper said, safeguard United States security through preserving a system of bilateral agreements and regional arrangements. What kind of regional arrangements have we had as a stepping stone toward world government? Well, we have NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. If Europe goes to war, we go to war. Well, what about CETO? What about all these different regional organizations? Then a third point they mentioned, maintain and generally increase or gradually increase the authority of the United Nations. Have we seen that? Yes. Who was it that sent peacekeeping troops to Korea? Who was it that sent peacekeeping troops to Vietnam? Who was it that did not declare war on Korea or Vietnam? The United States. Why? Because they said we have to circumvent the absolute constitutional authority that says only Congress can declare war. So they had to say it's a police action under the jurisdiction of the United Nations. Therefore, we can send American boys to die in foreign countries and there's no war declared. So they've gradually increased the authority. And even today, they're talking about the UN needs more authority and not just put sanctions, but declare war on Saddam Hussein. So are they gradually building the authority of the United Nations? Yes, they are. And then a fourth point, they said way back in 1959, was that they had to have a more effective use of the International Court of Justice, where they could come into the internal affairs of different countries. Well, it just so happened that we recently passed in 1987 the Genocide Convention Treaty. That means now that the Connolly Reservation Act that limited the United Nations from coming into our country and having jurisdiction over private citizens and our government has now been eliminated. And now the United Nations can come into this country legally In 1974, the Foreign Affairs magazine carried an article by Mr. Richard N. Gardner. It was called The Hard Road to World Order. Doesn't that tell you exactly what we've been seeing on television? Mr. Gardner complained, and I quote, that we're witnessing an outbreak of short-sighted nationalism. America want to be Americans. That seems oblivious to the economic, political, and moral implications of interdependence of all nations. So he said we've got to have a strategy. Notice what strategy he said. Quote, the house of world order will have to be built from the bottom up rather than the top down. He went on and said, we must have an end run around national sovereignty, eroding national sovereignty piece by piece. It will be accomplished rather than the old-fashioned frontal assault. So they said, we can't have America rejecting national sovereignty by a frontal assault. So we've got to just legislate it away little by little so the people won't even know what's happening. And that's exactly what's been going on. In the fall of 1984, let's see if anything's changed. In the Foreign Affairs, Mr. Kurt Waldheim, everybody's probably heard of him. He was a Secretary General of the United Nations. He was a former Nazi, and he's been brought in front of the news within the last year to year and a half. He said, and I quote, as long as states insist that they are the supreme arbiters of destinies, that as sovereign entities, their decisions are subject to no higher authority. So if the United States insists we are our own authority, nobody higher, like a world court, is higher than our own authority, international organizations will never be able to guarantee the maintenance of peace. End of quote. So now do you begin to see what the Council on Foreign Relations is doing? Those who founded the Council on Foreign Relations, Colonel Edward Mandell House, was a Marxist. Who founded communism and Marxism? Well, you had international bankers that financed it and paid for the overthrow. Who do you have in the Western world in capitalism? The international bankers control it too through the Federal Reserve System. So you have the thesis, communism, the antithesis, capitalism. They're on a crash course. What do you have out of it? The New World Order, which will neither be capitalism nor communism, but controlled by the state with a type of socialistic government, but not communism as it's explained in the world today. Notice now the soft peddling of international socialism and communism by the Council on Foreign Relations. I think this is very important for us to understand. In the Foreign Affairs, they have a structure in which they allow many different authors to write articles. Notice some of the Marxists who have written articles for the Foreign Affairs magazine. Leon Trotsky, who along with Lenin helped to overthrow Russia for communism. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, Yugoslavia's Tito, all wrote articles for this magazine, Foreign Affairs. When Trotsky died, and he was one of the two top communists that overthrew the Tsar of Russia, Foreign Affairs magazine published an article that eulogized him. Notice what it said about him, quote, he gave us, in a time when our race is woefully in need of such restoratives, the vision of a man. Of that there is no more doubt that of his great place in history. So here they eulogize Trotsky and say that he was a great man and he came along at the right time in history to be great. Well, what was he great for? Communism's only killed 161 million people in the last 70 years. I mean, what's great about that? They believe that the end justifies the means. So however you get to the end product of New World Order, it doesn't matter how many people suffer in the process. Well, Lenin was so admired by this publication that he actually gave articles and wrote articles for it. And there were many, many of his thoughts that were published in Foreign Affairs magazine. The Council on Foreign Relations annual report for 1986 noted the following, quote, we were intrigued to read news reports that Mr. Gorbachev himself was reading articles excerpt from Foreign Affairs in preparation for the meetings with President Reagan. That's interesting, isn't it? Why in the world would he have to know what Foreign Affairs said? Was it because Ronald Reagan followed what Foreign Affairs said? Well, sure. After his first term in office, wasn't he shot during his first term? Then after that, he just flooded the government of the United States with Council on Foreign Relations members. And by the time he left office, all but 60 people in the entire government of Ronald Reagan were CFR members or people picked by the CFR. So why do we think that he got a bullet? To put him in line, to let him know, you either go along or you're a dead man. So he did. He went along. I want to show now, just a couple for a minute or so here, the cohesion between Marxists and the Council on Foreign Relations to prove that they have no aversion to communism. To be exact, they even help promote it because it helps to promote a new world order. Here are some of the guest speakers that have appeared at the Pratt House, which is the building in which the Council on Foreign Relations resides. The 1959 report listed Fidel Castro as a speaker, McCoyan of the USSR, Oscar Lang of Poland's State Council were speakers, Yugoslavia's Marko Nikolic, I can't pronounce that name, it's a hard one, and it listed at least 30 other socialists that spoke in that year to the Council on Foreign Relations. The 1984 report noted some of the following that spoke before them. Robert Mugabe, a communist dictator of Zimbabwe. Daniel Ortega, at that time, the communist dictator of Nicaragua. Ungo, who was the leader of the El Salvador revolutionaries. Kelly of Germany's far-left Green Party. That's the Environmentalist Party. And 3 officials of the Communist Chinese People's Republic government. So as late as 1984, does the Council on Foreign Relations believe that international communism is compatible with their goals and methods? Yes, it is. They believe, without a doubt, that there is coming a one-world government. They will control it. They are the founders of international communism through money. They are the ones who said we will control it, we'll build it up till it will be equal to capitalism. So there you have it again. The thesis, communism. The antithesis, capitalism. Put the two on a collision course, and out of the rubbles of it, you have a new world order. That's exactly what they're doing. That's what's going on in the Middle East now. They said that the third and final of these world wars would eventually be in the Middle East. I'm not saying this is what's precipitating it right now, but it could be, because they will go to war in the Middle East eventually. Well, they also said that they would introduce bills in Congress. And this is the last thing I'm going to mention, except the final scripture today. Made this statement. And then I want to show you what they're doing right now to implement their final structure for the mark of the beast. She wrote in her article in 1961 in the Indianapolis newspaper, quote, "What is the establishment's viewpoint? Through the Roosevelt, Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy administrations, its ideology has remained constant. That the best way to fight communism is by a one-world socialist state governed by experts like themselves." That's exactly what they want to do. The result has been policies which favor the growth of the super state, gradual surrender of the United States sovereignty to the United Nations, and a steady retreat in the face of communist aggression. End of quote. As I'm speaking right now, there is a bill before Congress, the House of Representatives, H.R., House of Representatives Bill 4793. My understanding, if it is correct, this bill will merge us with Europe by computers for a new marking system such as the barcodes that we have on all of our products, so that Europe and the United States can be linked economically for trade. Do you realize what this means? because I've given sermons before showing that they're now looking for someone who can control the computer who will be morally of good reputation. And the suggestion was the Pope of Rome. That's a tremendous suggestion, because when we look back in the book of Revelation, chapter 13, it becomes even more interesting. In the first 11 verses, or first 9 verses really, it's talking about the beast, the political power that rises. It says Satan's going to give him the power. We've already seen that it can be given because Jesus said so. And he was tempted and offered that power. Then it says in verse 6 that this individual is going to blaspheme God. Then verse 7 it says it was given to him, this power that's rising, that they would make war with the saints. The real saints of God. And then those others who haven't come out of Mystery Babylon will also be made war against, and some of them will even wash their robes white in the blood of the Lamb. Then when you drop down to verse 10, it says, he that leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He that kills with a sword must be killed with a sword. So if anyone who is a true Christian wants to take up the sword to fight the system, well, the Bible already tells us you're going to be killed with a sword. You want sure martyrdom? Pick up the sword and go against the system. They'll hunt you down. They'll kill you. You're not going to stand up against them. Then in verse 11 it says, I saw another beast come up out of the earth. The second beast was different. It said he had 2 horns like a lamb. That's religious. Jesus Christ. And he spake as a dragon, Satan the devil. I've given so many quotes in the past where popes have claimed to be God. Speaks like a lamb. Jesus was the Son of the living God. And yet he spake as a dragon. He appeared to be one thing, but he was in reality something else. Verse 12, and he exercised all the power of the first beast. So apparently there's going to be a political and religious, and they're going to go hand in glove. And they're both going to be elevated to equal status in the eyes of the people. But this second beast is going to cause the earth to go after the first beast and worship him as their savior, political savior. Verse 13, and he does great wonders, so that he makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceives them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword and did live. So there's coming some type of image. When you look this word up, it can mean representation, it can mean picture, it can mean likeness. And a likeness is a hologram or anything where they make it look just like this person. It could be a statue. I personally believe with the electronic that we have today that it's going to be some type of a hologram where his picture is on satellite television. It's going to be beamed into every home around the world. I don't know how it's going to be, but that is a good possibility. Verse 15, he had power to give life unto the image of the beast. And the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. So it's going to be the acceptance of this beast as God. And you see, what follows is after you pledge allegiance to this individual, the beast, then you are allowed to enter into the new world order. And the new world order is economics, basically, because everything revolves around economics. If you don't eat, you can't live. If you don't have the money to buy food with, or to buy the fertilizer, or to buy the seeds to put in the ground, you can't live. You can't eat, you can't survive. So everything in the world has to do with economics. And that's what even Karl Marx said. He looked around and said, capitalism is decadent. We've got to have a new system. And so it's based on economics, really. And so after an individual accepts this new world order and its leader, notice what happens. And he caused all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. In ancient times, showing a loyalty to the high priest in witchcraft and Satanism, they would place marks on their body to show their loyalty to that god. Well, this time it's going to be for sheer survival economically, for food and so on. And it's going to be placed on the right hand or forehead. I know whole churches that teach, oh no, this is nothing but a day of worship. just preventing you, if you don't worship on their day, one day out of the week, well, you can go buy groceries the rest of the time. But this says no man can buy or sell if you don't have that mark that identifies you with this man that claims to be God. And that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here's wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast. And at the time John received this revelation, Romulus was the founder of the Roman Empire, and the word Romulus adds up, when you have the numerical value of each letter, adds up to 666. The Pope in Rome, his hat, and the words Vicarius Filii Dei, when you add those three words up, it adds up to 666. Absolutely identifying the beast system, the political, and also the religious system that goes hand in glove. And it happened during the Middle Ages. It's going to happen again, only with advanced technology that will absolutely put every person on the face of the earth in absolute bondage to this system. If we survive, we will accept it. Otherwise, it will take divine protection from God Almighty. And I'm here to tell you, Revelation chapter 9 verse 4 says that when some of these things happen, all men on earth are going to come under these plagues and the nuclear warfare, except those that are sealed in their forehead. I pray that God will give us the courage never to look back and never to look to anyone besides Jesus Christ of Nazareth, so that He will count us worthy to be sealed for that protection, so that we can praise His name day after day, knowing that the true kingdom of God is about to emerge on planet Earth to supersede the evil that's going on today.